Mascots have been something that, for me, have always been part of baseball. The entire time I've been watching baseball and been a fan, they've existed. They've been a part of the game. But as you were just telling me before we got on here, it's actually like the 60th anniversary of Mascots, and they actually haven't always just been a part of the game. And while it is, we are recording right here before the trade deadline, about a half hour out before it. And for all our Mets fans, we will give you some thoughts
on what we've seen this weekend with the Scherzer going.
What we might see in the next half hour. But we'll be ending the podcast with that Mets discussion and starting the podcast with this one, as in 1964, our New York Mets were the first team to introduce a mascot.
And you think about that, they moved into Shea Stadium that year. They played 2 years in the Polo Grounds, and the Mets were bad. We've talked about this a million times. So I guess to give people a reason to show up at the ballpark, and interestingly enough, the Yankees went to the World Series in 64, so they're great in the early 60s, as they generally are. And so you had to give fans and families a reason to come to the game.
So is this sort of just the natural evolution of like all of those stunts the old-time owners used to pull, like in order to drum up interest and attendance for like a middling to bad team? Because you had those crazy Red owners that would go trot out a midget, or I guess
Bill Veeck, you mean?
Bill Veeck, right? He would as a publicity stunt, basically. And obviously, as baseball and the Major League Baseball became more and more professional in organization, you couldn't really do that with the game itself. So a mascot kind of seems like the natural evolution of something.
I wonder if the Mets weren't so bad, if they would have gone to them. I mean, they were bad for 2 years, and like, well, we got a bad team. Let's get a big baseball head with a smile on it, and we'll bring it.
That's honestly what I'm thinking, is that probably had something to do with it, just because it was something that set you apart. It was a reason to come watch the Mets at the stadium, that they didn't have to try and sell you on the idea that this was a good baseball team for that reason.
And the very meaning of the word mascotte, which is a French word, means lucky charm. So, that's how it came to be. And there were other teams that occasionally would flirt with a mascot. The Cubs apparently had a taxidermy head in 1908 of a bear.
Well, I mean, like you have the colleges where the Georgia Bulldogs have the bulldog,
Right,
USC had the guy on the horse running around the track. So,
but anthropomorphic is a little bit different. And then the Mets...
This was something that was not linked, because this was linked to the team, the Mets, but there's not a Met. You can't be a Met. There's no such thing. Yeah, it's close. It's the New York Metropolitans, which I don't even know how many Mets really consider themselves a metropolitan.
The New York Metropolitan Baseball Club is what they founded it as.
Right. So, but this was something that they could just be like, oh yeah, this is what this team is represented by, because they weren't named something nice like the Cubs, or if you're in the college, the Tigers,
or the Yankees. So the Yankees, only 3 teams don't have a mascot.
Right.
The Yankees, okay, but actually, I did find,
you did try to quiz me on this. My first 2 guesses, I think, were the Red Sox and the White Sox,
right,
which both have mascots.
Well, now, yeah.
But, I mean, those were reasonable guesses, especially because you fed me that they were original teams.
The Dodgers don't have one, so they go, and another New York area team, so originally, obviously, in Los Angeles, and the Angels. So only New York and LA don't have mascots.
Now,
although
it makes sense to me why the Angels don't have a mascot. Because there's no way you can make an angel mascot.
Oh, I think you totally could make an angel mascot. It would look really silly.
It would come under fire from like half of the different Christian, faiths in the country.
I don't even think about that.
Just think about it that way. That would be potentially even more of an incendiary topic about some of the mascots we're going to talk about that got retired for how bad they were.
Well, and that's so I was going to do this at the end, but I'm going to do it now because the Yankees, they like to hide the stuff that isn't so good.
Shocking.
Because they're baseball's most famous team. So in the 1980s, the Yankees, they weren't very good. They had Don Mattingly. So to boost morale, the Yankee front office agreed to the addition of a giant pinstripe bird with a large mustache named Dandy.
I was going to say,
I don't have any recollection of this.
Also bring up having a bird mascot in a division where you also played with the Blue Jays and the Orioles is a bit of a choice.
That's true, and the Blue Jays were around by then, so that's an excellent point. So here's where we go. So Dandy was not accepted by the Yankee faithful, and it's a bit of an understatement. He was beaten up in the stands by bloodthirsty New Yorkers. The person playing Dandy quit. The Yankees chose not to replace this employee, so they just beat the hell out of the guy, and he never showed up again. That's great.
It's like people always talk about how insane the Philly fans are, but they love the Fanatic.
Right. So I would say, if you and we can go through some of the other mascots. The ones that sort of remain today that are most famous would probably be the Philly Fanatic. I would say out of all the mascots.
If you're talking about just to me in knowledge of team mascots and literally knowing that they have a mascot, I can generally name 3 off the top of my head, one of them being Mr. Met, the other being the Philly Fanatic, and the third being Dinger, the Rockies mascot.
Which is amazing to me because
I don't know why everybody knows Dinger. I guess it's because he's a
dinosaur, right?
Big, stupid... Okay, it's because he's a big, stupid purple dinosaur, so he reminds everybody of
Barney, yeah. Definitely.
Except he's a Triceratops instead of a T-Rex.
Yeah. So,
But there's plenty of other mascots. You'd think a team like the Diamondbacks would have a more recognizable and known mascot, but they really don't, at least to my knowledge. Let me go through and
I think you have to be like in the town to actually know the mascot, and be familiar with it. Yeah, I've been to the ballpark in Colorado, so I've seen Dinger, running around the stands.
Who do you think the Arizona Diamondbacks mascot is?
It had something to do at one point with originally it was the Bank One ballpark, so something to do with Bob.
Okay, you're close there because I was saying, fans out there, if you had to guess what animal the Arizona Diamondbacks mascot is, you would guess a snake. It's Baxter the Bobcat.
Baxter the Bobcat, because they're very popular in Arizona.
Apparently, which just makes no sense. Like, wait. So this team is literally one of the few teams that is an animal, and you have a different animal as your mascot.
So you're a fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Right? So the Fanatic apparently was mimicked in an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
So there's a couple episodes where they deal with the Phillies. One of the best ones being where they try to come up with a plan to sneak into the World Series game when the Phillies were playing in the World Series. And I think the part of the problem is like trying to kidnap the Philly Fanatic at one point before giving up on the insane idea. But it was just like the Philly Fanatic and the fans toward it, the general sentiment I always got is they think it's stupid until another team's fan starts making fun of the Fanatic. Then it's like, how dare you talk about our guy?
Yeah, I think mascots are not, can I say this, for serious baseball fans, right? You're that's a bemusement. Normally the mascot is in there shooting T-shirts into the shout out of a pneumatic gun or something like that.
The best compliment I could pay towards a mascot is at no point did they ever impact the game. Like as long as they're not impacting my ability to enjoy a game, like they're not trotting Mr. Met out to do dances on the dugout in the middle of the inning.
No,
what they do does not factor into my enjoyment of the game whatsoever.
But the Philly Fanatic is the most sued mascot in mascot history because he would mimic and make fun of people to a fault. And obviously, you've seen the video where Lasorda back in the '80s. So he's got an effigy of Lasorda and he's carrying it around. And Lasorda comes out of the Dodger dugout and he finally catches the Fanatic and grabs the thing back. And the Fanatic is running around behind him trying to grab the thing back, and he's jumping. Lasorda is pounding, the Philly Fanatic and the effigied, Lasorda to try to.
The fans thought this was the greatest thing.
Well, they couldn't tell if it was complete because Lasorda looked kind of serious when he was doing it.
Right, so they're like, "Is this a real thing?"
Is he really mad?
The other problem is this
he was really mad.
Only incident in Major League Baseball of a team member assaulting a mascot during the game.
Right, you're talking about Randall Simon
yes.
in Milwaukee during the sausage races when he, for some reason, I don't even understand why he did this. He took a bat
and just went after
and started wailing on one of the sausages. Now, I don't think the sausage came out of his casing or anything like that.
But it was completely out of left field.
And I think he was like arrested or something like that on assault charges. Like during the game, this player ends up start wailing on the mascot. And I don't know why it's in the National League East, right? We've got the Mets. We talked about the Philly Fanatic. Mm-hmm. But one of the more infamous mascots, well, I don't know if it's infamous. I always thought it was weird when I was a kid. So when the Braves moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta, they they put a mascot in they called Chief Knock-a-Homa. That's NOC-A-H-O-M-A. Isn't that cute, right? Knock-a-Homa, knock-a-homer. I get it, right? So the Chief had a teepee.
Which we've seen. I've seen this.
A teepee out in left
and
field.
And he comes out and he dances.
If the Braves hit a home run, he comes out and he does a war whoop and goes around. And even at the time watching this going, there's something wrong with that. It just doesn't look right.
Part of me is like, can you really?
He had the worst seat in the house
from the state that brought us Stone Mountain. Like,
so finally, the Native American tribes, kind of forced the Braves to get rid of Chief Nakahoma, and they have who's their mascot now, because I can't even tell you the name of it. They've had it for years. That's the thing. They become so forgettable when they're not the Philly Phonetic Blooper. But this is a team that wins division champions all the time. And they have a mascot named Blooper. Does that make any sense at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for certain teams, it's like it's just hard because, like, if you're the Padres, what's a Padre?
Well, but the Padres had probably one of the more famous mascots of all time in the San Diego Chicken, who was not directly affiliated with he was sort of like an at-large player, so that there was a whole fight about who owned the rights to the San Diego Chicken, and I think the guy's name was like Ted Giannoulis. Believe it or not, I remember the guy's name. Yeah. And he, did very much to protect his identity.
They talked about the
right. He was
a bit of an iconoclast himself.
Right, and before the Philly Fanatic was the San Diego Chicken. Now, Mr. Met doesn't have anywhere near the storyline of that, because he doesn't really do anything. Although there is a Mrs. Met, right?
There is a Mrs. Met.
And how did the Mrs. Met come about? It was like in a TV commercial. I mean, it was a Saturday Night Live skit where they were trying to mock the Mets.
Right. And then the Mets in like the 70s trotted her out for like a year or two, and then she vanished for like 30 years. Then she appears in a 2003 This Is SportsCenter commercial.
Right.
10 years after that, the Mets officially reintroduced Mrs. Met, and she's just been on the sidelines since then.
So now you have a pigtailed almost. I think she's got like a pigtails or something like that. Mascot. So I don't know what it is with the National League East that has, and I couldn't tell you. The Marlins have a
Billy the Marlin.
Billy the Marlin. Like, what is that?
At least give him an M name for the alliteration.
Right. And the Washington Nationals. Oh, I guess they do the president's race. Right. Is that a mascot?
I don't think so. But I think they count in this the same way the sausages count for the even though they also have had their own mascots, the Brewers. But I don't think the Nationals might have their own mascot.
I think they do. Well, we know that out of all the teams, only 3 of them don't. So they must have something that's representing some sort of a mascot. And mascots.
They're the racing. They have the
racing president. They call that a mascot. I don't really understand that. And I always felt like as a kid, like the Jets didn't have mascots, and the Giants mascots didn't have cheerleaders, and the Giants didn't have cheerleaders, and the Knicks until recently. The Knicks don't have cheerleaders now. They have the Knicks City Dancers because New York's too cool.
Somehow that's
for cheerleader. Well, by the way, cheerleaders. I mean, do we really need them in the first place? At this point, you're just like, why are we still doing that?
Part of me is just like, I feel like if there are people out there that enjoy cheerleading, even this is completely off topic.
True that.
Completely off topic. But like, there are people that enjoy cheerleading for like the almost rhythmic gymnastics.
It's an athletic endeavor. I agree.
I think that aspect of it is really cool. Having cheerleaders at professional sports games. It just feels very archaic.
Say the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders.
Right. It's just there's just something that's so like we're really not any better. Not that there's anything wrong with it. These people are being taken, but it's just like we really need to have this during our sports game.
Well, and you would accept it at a minor league game. Like, remember when you went to New Haven and you got to meet Rally the Raven?
Right. And I think mascots are at least on some level, not necessarily less demeaning, but less objectifying, I feel like, than cheerleaders. Because like there's an objectification element to cheerleaders that doesn't happen in the same way that it happens with mascots.
But you I think at minor league baseball, I totally get the fun aspect of having a mascot be part of the action.
And also with a minor league thing, you have to sell people on a value prospect of coming to watch a major league game that isn't entirely predicated on you are watching the best baseball players on the planet play this game. That's why, for me, mascots in the major league games don't really have any impact as long as they're not interfering with their game, because they're not a part of the economics I'm looking at when I'm going to a major league game. When I'm going to a minor league game, the overall entertainment,
it's an experience, different experience. Yes,
is a lot higher. So having a mascot there, especially to help entertain the kids, becomes a lot more relevant, I think.
And the mascot is there, I think, for the 3-year-old daughter who you drag to the game, who really is, you don't get there during batting practice if you're bringing a little kid to the game. No. Show up like at first pitch, because invariably in the second inning the kids go, when are we going home? And so that's the way.
Already got on.
So then you point, look, there's the mascot. Like, would you want to go get your picture taken? So that takes a couple innings to take care of that. So it's there to entertain families.
Going to the gift shop and getting the mascots another couple innings, and okay, you bought yourself most of the game now if you wanted to go.
But I think I would be fine as a baseball fan were there no mascots at all at any Major League Baseball game. No, that's not going to happen, obviously. It's part of team's branding.
Right, it's part of team's branding. I think more so mascots just aren't there for us, and that's okay. And I think enjoying the wacky things that happen with mascots is fine. I enjoy the sausage race. I enjoy the president's race. It's fun.
But you don't really see that kind of stuff like the Cardinals' mascot is Fredbird.
Fredbird. He wanted to call him Freebird.
Fredbird. That was Leonard Skinner had a problem with that. And so I don't know anything about what his antics. Does Fredbird have particular Fredbird things that he does?
But outside the fanatic, mostly I think in some respects being known, because what the hell is a fanatic? Like he
oh, that's a fan. I really like the film.
But you look at he's a weird looking thing. But outside
yes,
that,
he is.
You don't really know of what any team's mascot. I barely know what Mr. Met does.
And they didn't really well in the case of. They do appearances, obviously, and so the Philly Fanatic, I guess, when they started that, he was like $5,000 for the uniform for the outfit, and the team didn't buy it, so they had to buy out the contract for $250,000 when they finally sold the team for the Philly Fanatic, because somebody didn't have the foresight to think we need to put this inside our own organization.
Exactly. I mean, and sometimes teams swing and miss, and I think the thing with mascots is that, especially if you're not a fan that's regularly going to the ballpark, your team can introduce a mascot and have them be gone before you even realize they were a part of things. Because some of these guys were only around for like a season or two. They could bring him in, they try him out, they realize, oh, nobody's responding to this, and they just get rid of him.
So there's a mascot in Houston, and they had one that was called General Admission. General, like, I'm a general. And he was a middle-aged white guy, as they write, in a cavalry uniform. And he stood proud on the outfield platform in the Astrodome while the fans ate hot dogs and beer. So he would fire off his cannon and whatnot. And then as paramilitary trends began to fall out of favor at the close of the decade, Houston decided General Admission had to be replaced.
So what decade was this?
This is like in the 2000s, I think. Okay. After the 1999 season.
Yeah, so it's interesting, because you'd almost think that would come back in and they would try to reinstate him a little bit after 01.
So they decided to go with a more kid-friendly mascot, Orbit, some kind of green outer space creature with questionable origins. And at the end of the 99 season, General Admission was literally killed off by Orbit. The extraterrestrial visitor zapped Houston's stoic serviceman with an alien ray gun, making quick work of one of baseball's more creative mascots. And that was the end of General Admission. So the new mascot killed the old mascot. So Mr. Met should be nervous.
I mean, apparently she's been watching a lot of How to Get Away with Murder.
That's why they brought Mrs. Met in. She's going to off Mr. Met at some point in the future.
Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do. The fans just the one thing I think is interesting about mascots is sometimes the fans hating him becomes why they're popular. So this is one I could think of. So the Phillies have the Fanatic in an attempt to engender the same sort of love for their organization. The Flyers introduced their own mascot, Gritty.
Yeah.
Who is just the most horrifying abomination that you've seen. And it's because there is such an intense, visceral reaction to him that I think he's stuck around now. So I think mascots can also end up like that, where I know the Rays have 3 different mascots. They have Raymond the Ray. They have another one, and then they have DJ Kitty, who is just a DJ cat they put on their scoreboard sometimes.
I just don't understand, why you'd have more than one.
Because you know what? You're just trying to drum up it's a great thing to be able to tweet for social media. If you have 3 mascots, every game gives you 3 potential clips to put up of stuff of them.
And the Brewers, the Milwaukee Brewers have, so this is how it can't be for kids, right? The Milwaukee Brewers have, I know one of their mascots is Bernie Brewer.
Yes.
Right? So when a Milwaukee Brewer hits a home run.
And then there was also Bonnie Brewer.
Right. He comes down the slide in the outfield, and I think he used to like drink a beer or something like that, but now it's for kids, so he can't do that anymore. So he just
also,
comes down the
I'm just saying, it's probably
Bernie
not the most
Brewer?
responsible thing to have a guy slamming a beer before going down like a 35-foot slide that's up in the middle of the air.
And I don't know if it wasn't Steve Gelbs, but some announcer went up and did the slide, like broke his leg coming down the slide, trying to do what the Bernie Brewer does.
And it's just like, this guy, you really don't think that guy needs to be slamming alcohol before he does.
So clearly, with 27 out of 30 teams having mascots, I wonder if the Dodgers and the Angels and the Yankees will hold out and never. Well, the Yankees had their mascot fail. I don't think the Dodgers ever even tried.
And just as a correction, Raymond, the Rays mascot, is not a devil ray. He's a sea dog, which is just a giant blue furry creature. Again, just further confusing things, because this time they have the name alliteration, but he's not the right animal.
Raymond the Ray, and of course,
but he's a sea dog.
The Buccaneers played in Raymond James Stadium, so you saw sort of Raymond James Investments sort of had a little branding opportunity there that they missed if the mascot is called Raymond, but I don't think they do sponsor that.
And the Washington Nationals did also try a mascot named Screech, who was a bald eagle.
I remember Screech. I remember that. So
hatched on opening day or on Kids Opening Day in 2005.
So it's something with the National League East to have these bizarro. Well, anyway, I think we've kind of done the mascot thing, and I wanted to get your take on what's going on in Metdom. Everybody that isn't a Met fan, wants to blame Steve Cohen, the owner of the Mets, for all the ills of having the largest payroll in the history of Major League Baseball. I guess what if you're not a Met fan would be an utter failure. Mm-hmm. Would you say the season would be that?
I think if you're a Met fan, we were talking about this. I think if you told Met fans just not even about performance, just some of the things that were going to happen to the team this season. Justin Verlander will miss the first month and a half of the season. Edwin Diaz won't play at all. Drew Smith will get suspended for 10 games. Max Scherzer will get suspended for 10 games. Jose Quintana will not pitch the first 3 months of the season. Pete Alonso will miss a couple weeks. Starling Marte will miss a couple weeks. Omar Narvaez will miss
a few weeks.
Yeah,
he missed like a month, I think.
Missed like a month,
if not more. Yeah.
If you told Met fans all that before the season, they'd be like, oh, so like we're maybe in playoff contention? Because that's a lot of things that would happen to you. They're not even speaking about the fact that then the team is just collectively not playing particularly well this year. So I think if you look at last season as a bit of an overachievement, this season is a bit of an underachievement. They're probably not as bad as... And we also have to remember, they're not as bad as they look. We talk about them like they're like a Rays A's level bad team, and they're really not. They're just...
They've just underperformed misguided Met fan, expectations.
I think ultimately Max will be remembered as a worse pitcher than he was for the Mets, not in his tenure here.
I tend to agree because the numbers themselves don't look that bad for Max Scherzer.
They look pretty good.
He was like 20-9 with a 3 ERA. Gave him a lot of home runs,
but that was mostly localized to this year. The thing that Met fans are going to remember is even though the stats look pretty good, he had some of his worst starts in the 2 biggest games he could have had
100% agree with that.
And I think that's what
they brought him there to win that game last fall, and he didn't win the game. And
so I think the fact that they were able to get a prospect as good as they did for Scherzer. Now, part of the thing that people think is that Scherzer is basically locked into opting in with the Rangers next season.
Right, and so the Mets are going to pay more than half of the remaining money on his
60% of the remaining money. The Rangers are picking up the other 40%, but the Mets aren't on the hook for the money for next season.
And of the 2 pitchers, and so I have said this, so if they do move Verlander today before tomorrow,
I don't think they're going to.
I don't really want them to because I don't think it'll make it better for the Mets because my sense is that they're going to run out this crew next year with the core Met players that they still have, and adding Francisco Alvarez and Beatty as part of that core. And Beatty hasn't had a great season, but Alvarez sure has. Mm-hmm. Lindor, Alonso, Nimmo, McNeil. I don't know. We could talk for a whole episode on the way I feel about McNeil.
I think if you're Jeff McNeil, you have to be very worried that they just traded for Luis Angel Acuna.
Yeah, he's still away from making it to the major leagues. They got a lot of guys who can play second base in the organization, though.
That's not That's not a good sign for McNeil's next contract with the Mets. They don't trade for that player if they're intending you on being the second baseman past these.
Well, he's 31. They gave him 4 years for $60 million. Yeah. So at 35, I don't know how much of a next contract really McNeil's going to get at that point. So I think when they traded Robertson, I think that morning you woke up and you saw they traded him after the game. And I kind of was deflated a little bit because, they raised the white flag of surrender. Right, and I wasn't really mentally ready to do that, even though that was exactly the right thing to do.
Even though it's the right thing to do for the team, it'll make you know what it will do, though, and has helped, is that it makes the last 2 months of the season fun again as a Met fan.
As long as they don't play guys like Vogelback and DJ Stewart and Danny Mendick.
It's much less painful for me to be griping about that and not playing the young guys than doing that also and being annoyed that we're out of the playoff race.
I think, as Steve Cohen's a good businessman, and so this was a very business-like decision they made, going, we're not going to turn it around this year. This team doesn't have it, and even though they were only 5 or 6 games under 500 at the time, they could have had a run of 16 out of 17 and gotten back into it.
You pointed this out to me. Let's say Met fans, hypothetically, somehow they play out of their mind in August and September. They make the playoffs. You're telling me this team with that bullpen is going to win a World Series.
And with a starting pitcher like Matt Scherzer, had they not traded him, who gives up home runs like they're going out of style right now. Once they lost Diaz, even with Diaz playing for the Mets all year, they needed more bullpen help to be in the playoffs.
Before the season, I was against re-signing Diaz because my entire thinking was there was simply no way he could ever be good for you as he was in that season. You will never get a better year than you got out of 2022 Edwin Diaz. It's just not possible.
And when you look at the teams that are really good that play in the play, because we learned last year as Met fans a very hard lesson, right? You can win 101 games, you can have a great season. It doesn't matter. And in the postseason, the teams that had the best bullpens performed the best.
Now the good news is bullpen is probably one of the easiest areas to rebuild your team at year over year. Year to year, you can change.
Except I have to say this. Except if you're Billy Epler, because some of the guys he's brought in to do that have beyond.
Well, if you're
Robertson and Raley,
hoping that David Stearns is involved in the front office in some way.
You need like 6 guys. The Astros, the Rays, the Dodgers. They bring in pitchers in the place like that. Where'd they find another guy like this?
Whatever they're doing with their analytics,
the Yankees have a good bullpen.
Better than what they're doing with the Mets are doing with their analytics.
Yeah,
that's what it's got to be. That somehow. The Rays and the Astros have figured out how to evaluate young pitchers and identify guys that, at a minimum, are effective much better than other teams have.
And the other thing you didn't say about the Mets for Met fans is I don't think you went into the season thinking that both Tyler McGill and David Peterson would have lousy seasons, being nice.
Look at it this way. 40% of the Mets games have been started by McGill, Carrasco, and Peterson. They are 16-25 in those games. If you're 9 under in 40% of your games, it's going to be really hard for you to be a playoff team because that means in the other 60% of the games, you have to play absolutely out of your mind.
And they're not that good.
You would have to be going because if they've done that in like 41 games, you add a little bit onto that. They would need to be doing something like 40-15 or something to being offset the fact that they stink in the other 40%. And that's just too much to ask from Verlander, Senga, and Scherzer. You can't ask them to be basically Cy Young versions of themselves, all of them at the same time.
But there's a path, and maybe it's narrow, right, where, okay, they're not as bad as they were this year, maybe not as good as the regular lineup was last year, and the pitchers, so you got Senga, and you got Verlander, and you might have Quintana, I'm assuming he's going to be there too. You go find a couple of pitchers, you get Diaz back, you get a relief pitcher, and you hope that there's mojo next year in a way that there isn't with this team.
There isn't mojo this year. You hope that, you step away for a year, you come back, because at the end of the day, you saw catching fire in September can mean a lot more than just playing consistently well throughout the season. Doing that, like the Dodgers do year in, year out, puts you in a position to make the postseason, but the hot team wins it most of the time.
And the one thing we're not talking about is that no one's complaining about a catching problem on the Mets anymore.
It's great.
Right? So you didn't even talk about that. Before the season, you had Omar Narvaez you brought in and Tomas Nido.
And now Nido's gone.
Nito's not. He's not even. They could bring him back actually if they trade Narvaez.
I think, and if you're a Met fan, if you're looking at the other aspect of it, with Brett Beatty at third base, Beatty is going to get the rest of this year, and he will probably get the beginning of next year. But if he's still playing like he is right now on July 31st,
agreed.
On May 31st next year, the Mets will have a new third baseman by the trade deadline. They might have a new third baseman by July, June.
And they're, the idea that the team needs to get younger. They've got some assets in the minor leagues, and so people are blaming the Mets for drafting a shortstop. They drafted they drafted a bunch of shortstops, and they had them in the organization. Mauricio's a shortstop, and the other guy they just drafted, the shortstop's usually the best athlete on the team, and so you have to understand that a shortstop, just like Tatis, right? Tatis now is one of the best right fielders in the game, right? He hadn't even played outfield before last year because they're the best athletes out there. So you figure you'll find another place for a shortstop to play.
Who knows how a shortstop's body develops, and maybe one of the shortstop you drafted that's big and has a plus hit tool puts on another 15, 20 pounds of muscle, grows another inch, and you're like, oh, well, you're a third baseman now.
And the Mets they drafted a catcher out of Georgia Tech last year, Kevin Parada, who is, I think he's in single A. He was with Brooklyn, I think.
He
right
might be in double A now.
Maybe he moved up. But, he's somewhat close to the major leagues, but they've got a 21-year-old catcher
who looks like a superstar,
who's going to be here for years. So now you have a trading chip.
Right.
So and that's the thing that Steve Cohen is talking about, building the minor leagues.
And this is how teams like the Dodgers are able to stay in contention every year. Because, yes, you've got Kevin Parada, who's the number one prospect in your organization, and he's not going anywhere or into the major leagues because you've got Sandy Alvarez in front of him.
You got Alvarez there, just like Mauricio can't play shortstop for the Mets because you've got Lindor blocking him. So any shortstop in the organization, when you got a guy who's still owed 8 years or 7 years on his $340 million contract, he better find somewhere else to play because they're going to be playing.
But you're going to be able to use guys like Parada, like Mauricio, next year when you need to go out and you need to go get a starting pitcher this offseason. That's what you're going to be able to dangle. Because another thing that you could look at is a guy like John Means could actually be real cheap this offseason.
Well, particularly if the Orioles make it through the whole season without ever using him. Right? We don't need this guy.
We don't need this guy.
I'd like that guy. I'm a big fan of his.
Exactly. So there's going to be pieces available that your prospects can get you.
So I think there was a point we both were feeling that 2024, and I still feel this way, it could go bad.
Oh,
it could be horrible. But I feel like there is a path, narrow as it may seem, that the Mets could be good next year. It doesn't mean they're going to win the World Series like I mistakenly predicted this year.
The only real nightmarish scenario I see as a Met fan is they're a team that treads water next year and then they go all in to try and make it work.
During the season.
Yeah. That's like the only nightmare scenario I kind of see floating around because that's how they could end up in cap hell.
Do you feel like Buck Showalter is good for next year and that's it? I mean, if he doesn't win either get to the World Series, what does he have to do next year to manage beyond it?
They got to at least win a playoff series.
Yeah, I get the funny feeling that after a while, for whatever reason, players get tired of listening to Buck, even though everybody, he's the venerated old guy and he knows every strategy.
Buck will be the manager next season. The Mets aren't moving on from him. So Met fans that hate Buck Showalter, I'm sorry. I'm not a huge fan of his in-game decision-making this season, but he's going to be the Met manager next season. If they have another season like they have this year, he'll be gone before the season.
Well, depending on what they, assuming, which we assume now as Met fans, that they're going to spend money and bring in some players we don't even know who right now.
The thing is, if they're not going to do that, then they'd actually probably get rid of Buck because why would you keep Buck around if you're not planning on competing next season?
I agree. And then Buck could, go off and go back to ESPN.
Well, they're cutting down, so probably not.
Yeah, so he could become a mascot or something like that.